should be all set.
Wonderful. Well, so these agreements are from SANE, the Socially Engaged Yoga Network, which is like a sister organization that's under the umbrella of YogaCare. And we just want to invite folks who are present here to check in with these agreements as we go through the session today. So being present and listening, and just with an active listening voice, and really hearing each other and what is shared and what other people share. And what is shared here stays here. You know, if people may share sensitive information or personal information or stories, and we just want to respect that. And also to practice getting proximate. So like sitting with anything that you hear today that might bring up discomfort, and really lean into that and explore, what's coming up for you around anything that might be challenging. We also want to ask people to pause and breathe before responding, especially if it's like you're heated in the moment and want to jump in. Maybe pause, take a breath, and plan your response. So we have the step up, step back, or take space or make space, which are, if you're someone who normally talks a lot or is very present in a group setting, we invite you to kind of take a step back and leave space for others. And likewise, if you're maybe more shy and quieter, we invite yourself to lean in a bit and speak up more. Assume the good. We can't know what is going on in anyone else's world but our own, and sometimes not even our own. But we want to assume the good in what other people share and what people bring. Impact over intention is a really important one, where people may have good intentions, but ourselves included, we also want to take a responsibility for when harm is done, even if we didn't intend it. And then feel free to move in ways that support you. So feel free to get up, move around, take breaks when you need to, be on or off camera in this online setting. I know, Zoom fatigue is real. And just especially, as we're recording the session too, if you don't want to be on camera, totally fine. We are going to take it off camera, like towards the end, or off recording towards the end. So just be on the lookout for that. And then, as we're sharing things, we want to cite the source of, to honor the source, so that folks are not, us do no harm, right? That we're not taking information from other sources without, crediting. So is there anything else, any questions about any of these, or is there anything anyone wants to add? Is telling me no. So great. If people want to just kind of show of hands, raise your hand, or put something in the chat. Thank you, Natavia. And if everyone's okay with these agreements. Thanks, Scott. All right.
Okay, thank you, Greg.
Thanks, Deb.
I realized for a moment when I probably went away from the screen, so I don't know if you were seeing YogaCare's email during that moment when I went.
No.
Oh, okay, good.
No, we're good.
So we'll continue to work out. Okay. All right, good. I was wondering what you were reading from. All right, I'm going to go ahead and pull up our slides then and hand it over to Michaeline. Okay. Can everyone see? Yeah. Okay.
Great. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our workshop today. I'm just going to kick it off by talking a little bit about inflammation and what it is and the role that nutrition can play in kind of mitigating that in the human body. Next slide, please. So this is just a little bit of our itinerary. We did a little bit more than 5 minutes of agreements and intros, but that's all right. We wanted to cover all our bases there. And I'll be talking for about 15-ish minutes about nutrition and inflammation. And then Greg and Deb have some just fantastic practices that we're going to get into. And then we're going to have a bit of a panel discussion, so question and answer. But if you have questions before that, feel free to drop them in the chat. That's no problem at all. You know, we would love to address any questions you might have as they come up. And then we'll close and do some just general announcements about YogaCare and Sane and all of the fun stuff we've got going on. Next slide, please. Thank you. So basically, what is inflammation? So inflammation is the body's response to a threat, which could be either physical or psychological. So I don't know if you've ever heard of the two hormones, cortisol and epinephrine, but those are hormones that help our body in a lot of ways. Like they trigger that fight or flight mode, that fight or flight response when we're in a dangerous situation. And these hormones direct resources away from normal bodily functions that aren't necessary in an emergency. So like digestion, your body is not going to use energy and resources to digest something or, you know, go through those digestive processes when you're being chased by a tiger. That's not the priority. So those are really good hormones to have. That's a really good response. It's very smart of our bodies to do that. But when these hormones are constantly being released in our systems, when, you know, we're not in an emergency situation, and our organs and our internal systems are constantly exposed to them, when there's no threat of danger, it can do damage to our bodies by causing inflammation. So yeah, inflammation, like I said, is basically the body's response to something that it sees as a threat. So when you have a cut, you might notice that it gets red and swollen. That's your immune system trying to heal that. It's your body directing resources to that part. When people have an organ transplant, for example, the body can perceive that organ as a foreign invader, and the immune system will send resources to attack it, which causes inflammation. Allergies, for example, are another inflammatory response of the body incorrectly coding something as a threat. So like peanuts or something, they can't actually do damage to our system, but for certain individuals, the body has decided that that's something that it needs to attack, that it's a foreign invader, it's a threat, and that causes inflammation. So, you know, people who are constantly stressed also are always in this like inflammatory response, because stress is associated with the hormone cortisol. So people who are constantly stressed, their bodies are constantly seeing things as being a threat to their safety. So think about people, you know, for example, who live in low income or poverty situations. You know, the constant stress these individuals must be under, and how they're living in survival mode, maybe not knowing where their next meal will come from, if they can put food on the table, or whether, you know, their electricity will be shut off. That affects, you know, the cortisol levels in their bodies and the inflammation that they experience. Think about people of color living in the United States and how their bodies, you know, even unconsciously pick up on the fact that they are constantly under threat. And you know, people who exist in bigger bodies in our culture, experiencing the shame and stigma that is so pervasive in our culture. You know, the stress of constantly trying the next diet, which is known as yo-yo dieting, or constantly losing weight and then gaining it back, which is known as weight cycling. Inflammation is a result of our body seeing things as a threat, and these are things about our environment that we can't necessarily change. Next slide, please. But fortunately, there are some things that we can control. So if we can't control our environment, when it comes to the foods we eat and use to nourish and fuel our bodies, there are choices that you can make that help minimize the impact of inflammation on your body. Next slide, please. So Harvard released this graphic last year as part of a study surrounding anti-inflammatory foods. And it follows the general advice that's kind of been around for a while about what an anti-inflammatory diet is. So, you know, the general advice is, you know, avoid processed foods, avoid fried foods, avoid simple carbs like white bread and white pasta, avoid foods high in added sugars like soda, avoid processed meats. And that it promotes eating leafy greens and fresh fish that are rich in omega-3 fatty acids. It promotes eating nuts. It promotes eating fruits, which is all, it's great advice, but where I think this graphic doesn't quite get it right, what doesn't quite hit the mark, is that everyone has a different immune response to the foods that they eat. So, for example, this graphic suggests tomatoes as an anti-inflammatory food, but there are people with autoimmune conditions that struggle with eating tomatoes, and they're part of a family of foods called nightshades. People with autoimmune disorders will oftentimes avoid eating nightshades because they know that in their bodies, that doesn't feel super great. So using blanket statements like these foods are anti-inflammatory, these foods are pro-inflammatory, it doesn't make much sense because people are different. And, like we were talking about allergies before, there might be some people who have a nut allergy and they can't, eating nuts, even though they're anti-inflammation, that doesn't make sense for their bodies. So next slide, please. But there are a lot of things that the graphic did do right, because it's never a bad idea to add more leafy greens to your diet, which include things like lettuce, arugula, kale, and spinach. Those are all really good. They contain a lot of really great vitamins and minerals that we need for our bodies. And the darker the color of the leaves, by the way, the better that the food is for you, because that dark color corresponds to the iron content of the leafy greens. So that's exciting. And in fact, it's really important to make sure that you're getting a variety of colors in your diet. And that ensures that you're getting a variety of vitamins and minerals, because the color of the fruits and vegetables that you're eating corresponds to the vitamin and mineral content. And it's also a good idea to change up the grains that you're eating in your diet. Not because the more processed options like white bread and pasta don't have a place in your diet, but because your body likes it when you keep things interesting. So eating whole grain options, eating other grains, like we've got some examples here, like barley, oats, wheat, corn, rye, like quinoa, couscous as an alternative to supplement maybe some of the more processed options that are part of a lot of people's diets. That gives your body a little bit of something to chew on, and it keeps things interesting. But the most important thing you can do is find what feels good in your body. So typically with inflammation, if you go to see a registered dietitian, which, by the way, disclaimer, I'm not a dietitian yet. I am in my second year of school to become a registered dietitian. So I don't yet have the certification or anything, but if you were to go see a registered dietitian and you were concerned about inflammation in your body, what they would do is put you on something, if they decided along with your doctor that this was the best option, they would put you on something called an elimination diet, which is basically where you keep your diet exactly the same, but you remove one thing and you see how your body reacts. And if there's no change, then you maybe put that thing back and take out another thing and see how your body reacts. And maybe you take out a combination of things. And it's a very slow process of getting to know your body. But under the guidance of, medical providers, they can really help you get in touch with how certain foods make your body feel. This is also something you can do on your own, not necessarily going as far as an elimination diet, because you should always do that with the support of a healthcare provider, but just paying attention when you eat certain foods. If you're just like, oh, my tummy doesn't feel super great after eating this one particular thing. I wonder why that is. I'm going to pay attention to that. Maybe the next time I eat it, I'll see, maybe, I was feeling a little gassy that day and it has nothing to do with the food I ate. Or maybe, paying attention to, okay, maybe this food doesn't feel super great in my body, because there's no bad or good foods. There's just foods that feel good and foods that are more nourishing, and that's different for everybody. So there's no way around just like the general sage advice of eating lots of plants, eating fruits and veggies, getting variety in your diet, varying the sources of your protein, and tuning into what feels good. because I know it can probably seem a little boring for people to always say that there are no shortcuts when it comes to nutrition. You can't, there's all different kinds of diets out there, and they might work for some people, but ultimately what works for others isn't always going to work for you. You have to really tune into how you feel. And more than likely, a diet full of fresh fruits and vegetables will feel really good in your body, as long as you're not disallowing yourself from eating the things that also are either part of your culture or that just make you happy, like cake, or maybe you're from a culture that eats a lot of rice and beans, a lot of white rice and beans, and there's nothing wrong with white rice, just because it's more processed, and like the Harvard graphic said, that's an inflammatory food. That doesn't mean it doesn't have a place in your diet. Next slide, please. So I would love to hear a little bit about what foods that feel particularly good in your own body. We're all different, so I would love to hear what feels nourishing for you, and also how your body tells you that it feels nourishing. So for example, I make like a really simple smoothie every morning, which is just a banana, a handful of frozen blueberries, and a handful of frozen strawberries, and a little bit of soy milk. And I know that feels good in my body because I have so much energy after that. And it's not this rush of energy like I just ate a candy bar. It feels like, okay, I'm alert and I have energy to do work right now. I have energy to start my day. It doesn't feel like this crazy spike. It just feels like, oh, okay, I feel nourished. I feel ready to start my day. So that's how I know that those, like eating some fresh fruits and frozen fruits feels really good in my body. So I would love to hear someone else's experience. You can either post it in the chat or unmute, but it's part of the process of getting in touch with what feels good within us, and therefore determining what is what could be a diet that doesn't cause inflammation within our systems.
I'll also just jump in here real quick to let people know that right now Michaeline is in the spotlight. So if you speak, your voice will be heard, but you won't be on camera or in the video. So if you feel okay sharing.
Then, all right. This is Sharon.
Hi, Sharon.
All right. I feel good when I eat a hot bowl of cereal like oatmeal, wheatena, and I like to sprinkle blueberries on top. And
Sounds so yummy.
And it makes me feel good because I'm not hungry anymore after that. And I like nuts.
That sounds so yummy. And it sounds like you're really in tune with your hunger cues. Like after you eat that, you don't feel hungry anymore. So maybe you don't feel the need to snack on things, throughout the day. You eat that bowl of oatmeal and you're like, oh my goodness, that was so satisfying. My tummy is so happy. And now I can focus on what I've got to do because I just had a really satisfying bowl of oatmeal.
Yes.
That's awesome. I see in the chat, we've got another cereal fan, nourishing cereal with whole grains, flax seeds, fruit, and almond milk. Feel satisfied until lunch. Yeah, that's another element of paying attention to hunger cues. And just really paying attention to what your body is saying, like, oh, yes, I love this. And that's so important, tuning into that. Atavia said, pineapple, blueberries, and strawberries give me a boost. I feel awesome every time I ingest those foods. Also, brown rice, spinach, and salmon are feel-good foods. Yeah, I feel the same way about the fruit. It gives me like that energy boost, but without me feeling like I'm gonna crash in 15 minutes. I would love to hear, Atavia, if you're willing to share how you know that feels awesome. Like, what does awesome feel like? Or what do feel-good foods feel like in your body?
Yeah, I'll speak because it's quicker.
Oh, sure.
So in the morning, when I eat my fruits, I'm usually pretty hungry, and afterwards I don't feel sluggish. I feel energized. I feel I think even when it comes to focus, I feel like I'm able to concentrate a little bit better. And I don't tend to eat heavy in the morning. I keep it light, and then a little bit, I guess my heaviest meal I try to have at lunch or a little bit of a later lunch. And it kind of sustains me for the rest of the day. So when I don't feel sluggish or heavy or tired after eating, then I know that it's, yeah, they're feel good, healthy foods for me.
Okay, so not feeling sluggish, not feeling weighed down, just feeling like nourished and feeling boosted.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And notice how different that feels to say like, wow, I feel so nourished. There's no shame associated with that. It's like, oh, I'm eating this, but I know I should be eating this. That's that shame that we were talking about, that shame around, diet choices and everything, and that kind of shame and stress, that's what leads to cortisol responses. And there are studies out there that link like obesity and overweight, like a higher concentration of body fat. There are studies that link that with higher rates of inflammation. But with nutrition research, what's tricky is you can't control for things like shame and weight stigma. So with those studies, it's hard to say whether it's the fact that someone has a higher body fat percentage that causes the inflammation, or if it's the shame they feel about it. And it's the stress they feel about not feeling like they're making the right food choices, or feeling like they should be doing something else. And they're so deep in their shame that they can't, tune into what actually feels good in their bodies. They can't tune into, those feel good foods and the things that make them feel nourished. So when we talk about anti-inflammatory, foods, it's really hard to separate that from the environment and from, the context of everything else that's going on for people. So, the choices that you make with your food can be really empowering when you tune into like, oh my gosh, this just makes me feel so good. It's so yummy, and my body likes it too. So yeah, I know that's a little bit more vague. I know everyone would love to hear like, eat these, and you will feel amazing all the time. But fortunately, we do have to do the work to get to know ourselves. But that's also part of the fun, is getting to know what feels good in our bodies and building a relationship with our bodies and having a conversation rather than dictating, you should like this, you shouldn't like that. And yeah, Tavia said, she never thought about the connection between shame, stress, and nutrition. So yeah, I'm really glad we're having the conversation around that, because it's a big deal. We want to have a good relationship with our bodies. We want to nourish ourselves with what feels good, what tastes good, and what's gonna make us feel good for many, many years to come. So thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to talk about nutrition, one of my favorite things to talk about. And if there are any questions, feel free to either drop them in the chat, or you can hold off until the Q&A at the end. But for now, I will pass it off to Greg so we could talk a little bit more about how we can tune into our bodies and use our knowledge of inflammation to heal and process COVID. Oh, and sorry, there's further reading, a link in the chat. If anyone's interested, I can drop that.
Great, thank you, Michaeline. That's really helpful to lay that groundwork for us for the next part of the session. And I know we'll come back to that in the Q&A. We'll have a panel discussion at the end. So Deb, Michaeline, and I will kind of be on panel, and you can ask questions to the group, and we'll just keep it moving. Okay, so, when people hear research, sometimes it can kind of be like boring and drab. I'm hoping that this will be entertaining and fun. So I wanted to start out with some fun yoga research quotes. So just for context, yoga has been shown to help over 117 and counting physical and mental health conditions. And that's from Timothy McCall, who's a physician and a yoga therapist who has a website, Yoga as Medicine. And so there's a lot of resources for more information about anything that we're talking about here, but wanted to frame the conversation with that to start. And then This is one I kind of like came up with this one, like an apple a day keeps the doctor away, a pose a day keeps the doctor away. You know, and it's not just a pose, right? Because we know yoga is poses, you know, the postures, the breathing and meditation, and the whole lifestyle aspects and diet, nutrition, etc., which we covered in earlier wellness circle, which will be in our video library. So some studies by Goff showed that 1 to 2 times a week is a good enough dosage for doing yoga to help with cognitive performance. So memory and information processing, emotional regulation. Those are all things that even just with practicing once or twice a day can help. But there's other study, for example, showed a 12-week yoga program for low back pain helped with moderate and severe chronic low back pain. But there was no difference whether it was once a week or twice a week. And so, you know, the research that's out there is varying, and there's a lot more research that's coming out looking at, you know, how often do I have to do yoga? In general, doing it more often is better. So, but, you know, these are just some examples of some of the conditions that yoga can help with. Another one that came from the conference was a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. And this was presented by Satbir Khalsa, who's a Kundalini yogi researcher that's done a lot of research, including NIH studies on yoga. And this one was about mindfulness. So if you think about, you know, daydreaming and drifting away, sometimes, you know, daydreaming is like getting us away from the moment of what's in front of us. And there's, you know, I'm not presenting this to say, oh, it's bad to daydream or have your wandering mind. But in this one study they presented, people were less happy when their minds were wandering than when they were present with what's happening in the moment. So, you know, just think of that in your own life. If there's situations where, you know, are challenging or difficult, that sometimes you want to daydream to escape the present or what's happening right in front of you. So have some food for thought for about mindfulness. And you'll be getting, we will share the PowerPoint presentation so people have access to all of the links and such for any further investigating. Next slide, please. So yoga and inflammation, how we can kind of tie some of these pieces together. So again, like a consistent yoga practice is really helpful in doing a variety of techniques of yoga, and it works on many body systems and reduces inflammation in the body. There's a lot of research coming out about inflammation reducing in the body through yoga practices. In particular, 2 things I want to highlight that from the conference was research they presented around melatonin. So you may have heard of melatonin as something that people take for sleep or to help kind of regulate your circadian rhythm. A lot of the research is showing that yoga and meditation practices can produce melatonin naturally occurring in our bodies. And melatonin is a naturally occurring anti-inflammatory that promotes relaxation and optimal sleep. So our bodies are producing these things, and yoga can really help, and meditative practices can help with some of this, these kind of biochemical responses. Nitrous oxide. So you may have heard of this, or you may have experienced this at a doctor. I know when I had my wisdom teeth pulled out, like they gave you kind of nitrous oxide to relax you. There's some clinical trials that are looking at from Canada and the UK that have shown that nitric oxide nasal spray is a safe and effective antiviral treatment to prevent COVID transmission and symptom duration, as well as reduce the symptom severity and damage to those who are already infected. So there's a product called Sanitize, which is currently not available for purchase, but it's being researched and looking at the role that nitrous oxide can play in COVID prevention and treatment. Also, they shared that humming or doing mantra practice or singing or things like that, which we're going to do some practices in a little bit, is shown to release our nitrous oxide from our paranasal sinuses, so sinuses that are in the face. So when we're humming, we're releasing this feel-good, relaxing, antiviral chemical of nitrous oxide into our blood, into our airways, which then get into our bloodstream, which is fascinating. My mind was blown. So we're going to do a little bit of that to kind of experience that in a bit. Next slide, please. So a bit more about COVID and the inflammatory response. So as you may or may not know about COVID, it affects multiple body systems. And COVID is the condition. SARS-CoV-2 is the virus itself that infects the body, and then COVID is the disease or the condition that develops from infection, and it affects multiple systems, as you can see in this graphic on the right. Looking at like the lungs, it stimulates an inflammation response systemically, so throughout your entire body. Just wanted to give that like groundwork for looking at why we're talking about inflammation and yoga and COVID and the inflammatory response. Next slide, please. And this is research coming out of the Whole Health Institute. So this is Dr. Castle, who's one of the authors on the study that's noted at the bottom. Again, this is like fascinating, mind-blowing information here. So you may have heard some of the medications, if you see on the left, the standard treatments, some of the medications that have been used to treat COVID. Those medications are shown to interact in lymphocytes, C-reactive protein, in those ways, in the top bubbles that are in gray. So if you look at those top bubbles, those three bubbles in gray. Looking at yoga and meditation, all of those bright blue bubbles are all the inflammatory markers that yoga and meditation can act upon as well. And so if you look at the comparison between what the medications can do and what yoga and meditation can do, it's just phenomenal to see the systemic benefits of yoga and meditation practices on inflammation. So this is a visual representation of what I shared before about how yoga and meditation can help reduce inflammation in our bodies. And you see melatonin and vitamin D3 are also listed there. I'm not going to go into more depth about vitamin D3, but just wanted to touch on that yoga and meditation to see that kind of broad visual. Next slide, please. So research is coming out of the Ministry of Ayush, which is in India. It's a branch of the government. So kind of like a public health department we have here in Chicago, for example. But nationally, a government agency in India provides research and education on indigenous healing systems, including those that you see listed here, like Ayurveda, yoga, naturopathy, homeopathy, and other healing systems. In India, they're currently doing a large-scale rollout nationwide of integrating these healing practices in conjunction with conventional medical care. So I know in the US, and we have integrative medicine, which is one aspect of medicine that integrates these kinds of practices and others into conventional or Western medical care. And the Ministry of Ayush in India is recommending yoga therapy as an adjunct treatment to clinical COVID care. So they have large-scale rollout in lots of clinics throughout the country that have been converted into like COVID care clinics that are where they're introducing yoga therapy and doing tele yoga therapy as well, and tele yoga. So next slide, please. So here's an example of a tele yoga practice. Some of the things that we will be doing through the practice session in a little bit, but just wanted to show a visual of what they're doing like in a health promotion context throughout COVID in certain locations throughout India. Next slide, please. So a bit of the practice here. Some of these things that were recommended from Ayush as they presented at the conference, and some are other breathing practices that they recommended through other sessions that I attended at the conference. So I noted which of those are below, but wanted to take some time to do some of these practices together. So I invite you to get into a comfortable place, and just starting out with slow motion breathing. And we're not going to do these all for 5 minutes each, but they had recommended 5 minutes for each practice. And again, like any practices that are, that you're unsure of, working with a qualified yoga therapist or yoga professional who knows the nuances of these kinds of practices, and talk to your healthcare providers as well. But this slow motion breathing was I call it a finger mustache. So like if you make a finger mustache, and this one is really good for stimulating the vagal nerve. So the vagal nerve is responsible for calming your nervous system, and it increases carbon dioxide. So we really want to slow down the breath. So if you make a finger mustache, and we want to do nasal breathing, okay? So inhaling, just notice your breath as you're inhaling. Feel the cool air coming off of your finger. As you exhale, feel the warm air going onto your finger. Let's just exhale all the breath out. Take a couple rounds of that, inhaling and exhaling. Relaxing your shoulders too. You might kind of have a tendency to hike up your shoulders, but let's try to keep the shoulders relaxed. You can close your eyes if that feels comfortable for you too. And we want to slow down the breathing here. So slowing down the breathing is really helpful, elongating the breath, calming the mind. Inhale and exhale. And one game you could play with yourself is to try and slow the breath down so much so that you don't feel anymore the cool air coming in on the inhale. Or the warm air coming out on the exhale. So you'll notice as you're doing this practice, feel for yourself how slow you have to get the breath down to barely even feel the cool air coming in. And the warm air going out. You can also try dropping your finger and keeping with that sensation of inhaling. Bringing all of your attention to your nostrils, inhaling, trying to sense the cool air coming in. The warm air going out. So if your eyes have been closed, feel free to open them. We're just going to move right into the next practice, which is called sectional breathing. And the Sanskrit names of these are listed next to each one. So this one's really good for increasing our lung capacity. So we want to go back. Bring the slide back, please. Melissa. Previous slide. Okay, we'll just keep going with the sectional breathing. So keeping that slow moving breathing going, we'll inhale. And at the top of your inhale, just hold it for 1 second. And then exhale it out. Keeping with the slow moving breathing. All the way out. And then before you inhale, take a 1 breath or 1 second pause. And then inhale. Keeping the long, slow breathing going. Take another 5 breaths or so in that mode of the sectional breathing. Inhaling, taking a 1 second pause when you get to the top of the breath, and exhaling, keeping the breath all the way slow as you breathe all the way down. And then a 1 second pause before you start the next inhale. So 1 or 2 more breaths for that one. And then I'm just going to talk about the next one. Well, just keep breathing, keep doing your sectional breathing before we go into the bee's breath, but not going to demonstrate the bellows breath. It's a very fiery, fierce breath that increases the lung capacity, tones and strengthens the muscles of the heart, the bronchial tree, the diaphragm, abdomen, infuses the blood with lots of oxygen. There's a lot of contraindications for this one that are noted in the footnotes. For example, pregnancy or menstruation, high blood pressure, if you have significant nosebleeds, and eye conditions, stroke risk, or if you're suffering from asthma or chronic bronchitis. So there's a lot of things I'd rather have you do this if you're interested in working kind of more one-on-one with somebody or having more time to work with individual health conditions. But we're going to go into the bee's breath, which is humming, the one I referenced earlier about releasing nitrous oxide, and as an antiviral, antibacterial, a vasodilator, bronchodilator. So that means it opens the airways, it opens the blood vessels. So this one, it's like humming like a bee. So you want to take your index finger and just the simplest version of this, the basic version, is to close off your ears, like the soft cartilage at your ear, and just kind of press it in gently. Taking a deep inhale. And on the exhale, we're going to hum kind of like a bee buzzing. And you can do this with eyes open or closed, your choice. So let's try that together. We'll inhale, deep inhale into the belly, raising it to the chest. And then exhale. Release, inhaling. And exhaling. One more. Inhaling. And exhaling. And then Just drop your hands down and notice how you're feeling. So this is the last one I'll demonstrate in the interest of time. This one you can do with lying down. And this is the prone alligator or crocodile. It's been called multiple things. Also reverse shavasana or reverse corpse pose kind of helps with this. This is really good in terms of COVID, just related to lung support. I know Deb's going to share more about lung support in the next segment. But when you're lying down and you're really filling the back of the lungs, and it's a very efficient type of breathing to get into the back of your lungs. So if you have a yoga mat, or you can do this bed or couch, or whatever. Lie down in your way to your mat or to a prone position. Also, if you're pregnant, this has contraindication, so you cannot do this on your belly. You can, in a supported way, just to have your belly up. Okay. You can cross the arms, or if you have a block, or placing your forehead on the ground, and just begin breathing. And keeping that long, deep breath going. Really fill the back of your lungs. Feel the breath go into your low back and hips and the back of the lungs, inflating the body and exhaling, releasing, softening. And keeping the breath long and slow like we've been doing this whole segment. Inhaling. You can also try adding the humming or at home on the exhale, or inhale and exhale. So add the humming part. Inhaling, we'll try that together. And exhaling. Let's try that one more time. Inhaling deeply, filling the back of the lungs. And exhaling. And then just return to normal breathing. And feel what's going on in your body. Tuning into the body. As Michaeline was sharing earlier, just getting to know your body's response, really listening. Feel the impact. And remember, when you're doing any of these practices, hurts or is painful, but just stop doing it and make any modifications you need or ask any questions. Thank you for sharing this time of practice and research together. I will pass it along to Deb.
Hi, everyone. And we could have
Thank you.
100, or we could have 3. And it's all so important. And it's really important that you share this with other people. I hope you're really enjoying it and reaping a lot of benefits from it. Thank you, Greg, and thank you, Michaeline. All really, really important information. I'm going to give you the backstory on my part of the presentation so that you can kind of understand how this all came about. I have a very close friend of mine who, by profession, was a registered nurse and for many years served so many people. And during, maybe I would venture to say maybe about 18 years ago or so, she started sharing with a few friends that she was having difficulty in wheeling her patients around from room to room, or for that matter, pushing a cart with medical equipment. And after investigating it further, she found out that she had a disease called sarcoidosis, which is an inflammatory autoimmune disease. And it's very challenging because it moves through the body systems and the organs. And the only thing that you can really do about it at that time was steroids. And so it got so critical for her that it was advised that she ended up retiring from nursing, which was pretty heart-wrenching, as you can imagine, when you love a vocation, a profession, where you're helping so many people and you love what you do. And so she had to retire, which was economically and emotionally very trying, if you can imagine. And her condition started declining to the point where she had to be on oxygen 24/7 per day. So all day she's hooked up to a oxygen generating machine. So then her ability to move around and to do the things that we all take so much for granted was then diminished. And of course, it affected her emotionally. And so for years and years, not only was her lifestyle tremendously altered, but she also went on a very diligent research project about sarcoidosis, about what therapies were made available, and what she could do basically to help herself and to live a better quality life. And so she went to, at that time, the Cleveland Clinic in Ohio, and they were investigating the possibilities of her receiving a lung transplant. And so she went back and forth with her then young daughter and a few friends of we were able to periodically go with her to support her in her journey of trying to be well again. And so after several years of going back and forth there and being on the lung transplant list, there was no movement at that time. And so she was becoming very despondent and decided to switch gears a bit after some thoughtful investigating and prayer and meditation, and was led to the University of Chicago, where she began to consult with medical doctors there. She did get on the lung transplant list, and I would approximate that maybe she was on the list for perhaps a little less than a year. And one morning she calls me and she's very excited, but she's scared to death. She says, "Deb, they just called me and they have a donor. And I have to be at the hospital within 3 hours." And so her daughter and myself and another friend, we're there to help. And so we went there, and I can only imagine, and if you think about it, what that might feel like for a person who has not been able to breathe on their own for 18 plus years, yet alone, here is a moment where they have the opportunity to go through this surgery and hopefully and prayerfully make it through successfully, just the surgery, better yet, all the ramifications of the medications and the support that's needed. And so that's the backstory of my part of this presentation. I just wanted to give you a little bit of understanding of how this came about. And so sure, we hear people talk about in yoga or beyond, let's get into the breath and breathe. Well, of course, we know we breathe to live, right? We also breathe for many, many other additional therapeutic purposes, such as stress, anxiety, particularly when we think about ourselves and our loved ones making it through this pandemic and all the repercussions of the pandemic. We know of people that may have sleep deprivation, asthma, CPOD, high blood pressure, particularly emotional upsets. And so what we want to get to is the recognition that we want to do more conscious breathing. And with conscious breathing, we're doing more conscious relaxation. Because breathing has the tendency, as Greg pointed out in his presentation, to help with the nervous system. We're able to calm the body-mind complex. And we're able to receive the breath in a way that by being more conscious and more aware, that we're able to do better in our ability to just relax and release and let go, hence to have better well-being in our life. And so with that, could you go to the next slide, please? Yeah, that's great. Next slide, thank you. Thank you so much. So to go back to Rebecca, my friend, in her health challenge. So she has the surgery, and there were two of us there, her daughter and myself. And at that point, she could only write on a tablet. She couldn't speak yet because they had all the tubes and machinery and all that going. And so the surgery, as we hear from the surgeon who happened to come in while we were there, said that she did very, very well and that the surgery itself was extremely successful. And so with that, he also mentioned with the respiratory therapists that there are really critical things that have to be done, not just in terms of medication, but in terms of the way to teach someone to breathe who has not breathed on their own for so long. He said there are emotional aspects, there are physiological aspects. This is a new organ being introduced into her body. And so he wanted us to be a part of this discussion so that we would understand both the physiological aspects and everything else so that we could help her through this. And so having said that, both surgeon and respiratory therapists talked about something that I am delighted to share with each of you. Be it if you're knowing someone that is in that kind of compromised situation, but more importantly, to practice on your own and to think about these factors when you are breathing. And so the slide that you're looking at is just a suggestion for you to be mindful with any breathing technique. And there's so many different types of scientific healing breaths and things to calm the body, as we know. But these are things that the surgeon and the respiratory therapist shared with us And I think you'll find it very insightful in terms of tuning into your body and discovering how you feel. Michaeline talked about how foods give you a certain feeling. And Greg talked about postures and being more conscious of different breathing techniques. This is a little bit different because I want you to really think about these things, and then we're going to practice it before we conclude today. And so the first one is about changing the depth of your breathing. In other words, do you tend to breathe a shallow breath, or do you tend to put a lot of emphasis on your breathing, so maybe too much so? So you really want to connect with your breathing pattern, your rhythm, in terms of the amount of oxygen, the amount of prana that you bring into your body. And just when you're off on your own and you're lying in Savasana or seated, just be mindful about your breath and how it feels. If you're feeling that you're breathing more deeply, more fully. The other thing that they mentioned was about the rate of our breath. I know that sometimes I feel more like my breath is more rapid, and I want to really slow my breath down. On the other hand, if I feel that I need more energy, then I tend to do a different type of breath so that I'm breathing and energizing my internal organ and organ systems. Also, as a yoga teacher, I've noticed many times where if I say to someone, take a long, slow, deep inhalation, and what I've sometimes noticed is that people open their mouth on their inhalation, and on the exhalation, they let the breath out either through their nostrils or their open mouth. And the surgeon and respiratory therapist said that it is contraindicated to inhale through the open mouth, that it's always much more advantageous to keep the mouth closed and the nostrils open as you're breathing in deeply. Now, if you're exhaling, you can exhale through the open mouth and through the nostrils, but never inhale through the open mouth. And so I'm going to just say as a sidebar, what they were sharing during the 2 sessions that we had were just not only informative, but inspiring and thought-provoking, and one of which they encouraged me to share with other yoga practitioners and other people. And so it was heartfelt that they would share these things. The other thing they talked about was controlling or having an awareness of your body in general as you're breathing. Sometimes if I do a certain breath, I can feel almost like a tingling in my brain. It's like my brain is under-oxygenated, as most of our body systems are. And by doing certain breathing techniques, you're able to stimulate circulation in the brain. So the lungs, of course, are principally responsible, and the diaphragm, in order to make that happen. And so as we are thinking about these factors, I invite you to think about, how does my body feel? Am I comfortable how I'm breathing? Is my spine relaxed? Are my lungs relaxed? Is my heart relaxed and open? And so those are the kinds of sharing that they did, and we all practiced there in her room while we were there. And so I invite you now to sit back for a moment, and we're just going to practice breathing, but we're keeping in mind the things that I've shared with you regarding more internal how you feel. And be mindful that this can be done with many, many different types of breathing techniques. And so the whole idea is to really get into your breath, get into breathing, and discover more about your internal being, as well, of course, as your spiritual being, as we work with the breath. And so as you're sitting back and relaxing, or if you're lying down on the mat, whichever makes you feel comfortable, with your eyes open or closed, again, that's totally up to you. Think about, as you're breathing and taking in a long, slow, deep inhalation, how deep are you breathing? What's the depth of my breath into my body? How long am I holding that breath before I exhale? What about the rate of my breathing? Am I breathing more rapid, or am I slowly beginning to feel the stillness and slowness? And the rate of my breath is not just so fast, but more relaxed and deep and penetrating. Being mindful about allowing this prana, this air, to enter into your nostrils slowly and deeply. As you fill your entire solar plexus with this wonderful healing energy, this breath of life. And holding that breath for as long as it's comfortable for you, and then releasing the breath through your nostrils or through your open mouth. So with them talking to us and demonstrating these specific things to be aware of, I must share with you that Rebecca wrote on her tablet, "This is the first time in so many years I've been able to feel my lungs and feel air filling my lungs." Can you imagine? And so let's not take breathing for granted. When you breathe, breathe with intention. When you breathe, breathe in life, breathe in love, breathe in harmony, breathe in gratitude, breathe in peace, and breathe out all of those things for the whole universe. Not just for ourselves, but we're breathing for this planet. We are breathing to go through COVID and to come out healed and healthy and loving and strong. And so every time I go to Rebecca's house, she's breathing without oxygen, exercising as much as she can, eating healthy. And Michaeline, she probably really needs your help. And lastly, this is not an endorsement of a particular product, but the doctor gifted me this and said that everyone should have one of these devices and practice with it, be it lung challenge or not. because it really determines the capacity of your lungs. It has a meter on it. It's called a volumetric exerciser. And I think he said to me, they have them at Amazon, of course, and undoubtedly probably Walmart. But think about getting any device, but particularly this, so that you can work with exercising your lungs to their full capacity. And so with that, I'm open, Greg's open, Michaeline's open to any comments or suggestions or feedback at all. And I thank you so much for this segment of time.
Thank you so much, Deb, Greg, Michaeline. Deb, thank you so much for sharing that story with all of us. What a beautiful thing that that your friend can breathe. Think about it, especially somehow breathing has become a privilege for so many of us these days. And yeah, thank you for sharing that. I know that I also just want to say thank you to Michaeline for talking about how flexible and individualized diets and nutrition must be. I think it's a really important thing to keep in mind. And thank you for sharing that wealth of knowledge as well, Greg, with what you learned in the symposium. There are definitely some new things that I learned about the nitrous oxide and the bees breath and stuff in there. So I also appreciate Michaeline, and I think this was named in some shape or form. I do want to just say that, of course, everything that we've discussed today that's been shared is intended to be, you know, a complementary approach, right? So everything, you know, you could still, and we'd certainly advise you to talk to medical providers, your doctor, and follow, you know, what they're guiding you to do. And then these are intended to be supportive tools, right? So I know we're over our intended time and wanted to have more time for a panel discussion. So rather than me ask questions right now, what I suggest is we might take an extra few minutes and open up questions to the others that are here, if that's okay. And of course, if there are no questions, then I'll ask something. So you can type in the chat or unmute yourself.
I have a question. And this is for Michaeline. I read an article or several articles recently, and they talked about something like good inflammation. And I thought, good inflammation. I said, now, are they speaking like there's good bacteria and bad bacteria? Is there such thing as a good balanced inflammation in the body?
What was the context of the article? What were they saying about it?
Well, they were just saying that they seem to suggest that inflammation is not all bad, and that your body needs some sort of level of inflammation in order to ward off diseases or something. I wish I had the article with me. I had not heard of that, and I didn't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, that does make sense. The issue with anything is when it's chronic, when it's not in balance. So when we talk about inflammation, we're talking about, you know, like that chronic state that we exist in, like that constant exposure to cortisol and epinephrine that really overstimulates our body. And it's just not useful at that point. Our body can't regulate and do the things it needs to do. So I mean, yeah, like we want our body to have inflammatory responses when there's something that is dangerous or something that there is a threat and that it needs to ward off. Like when you have an infection, like there's tons of inflammation going on in your body when you're, you know, deploying your lymphocytes to go fight an infection. You want an inflammatory response in that case so it can, your body can heal itself. I think it's, yeah, Greg and I have had really great conversations about balance, and it's just balance is a moving target. It's not something like, I have achieved a state of balance and I am balanced forevermore. Like it's always a process of finding the things that will bring you to one part or the other along a spectrum of balance. So that's a really interesting point, Deb, because yeah, you do want inflammation in this sense, the way we've talked about it is when there's too much of it. So how can you regulate it? If we don't want our body to never have an inflammatory response, because then it can't regulate itself. So just giving our body the tools that it needs to heal as best as it can. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, it did. Thank you so much.
Michaeline, I also have a question. I am wondering, what are some ways to start dismantling shame around food choice or diet? Are there any techniques that you can share?
Yeah, oh my gosh, that's such a beautiful question. Because it's baked into our culture, right? Like I feel it. I'm on my own journey with that. And I feel like a hypocrite sometimes because, nutrition is my field. And it's like, I shouldn't be struggling with my own relationship with nutrition. I'm talking to other people about nutrition, and that's its own flavor of shame. So, I mean, I can speak to like what I do, which is, it brings a little bit of everything we've talked about today, just like that mindfulness, like when I'm eating something, just like really taking a second and tasting it, which sounds strange, but like I'm a big like I'll like make food and like sit down and watch something on Netflix and like that's my break time. But then I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not tasting the food here. I'm just like shoveling something into my face as I watch a show and then get right back to work after that. So I think we really start to combat shame when we stop believing that what we're doing is wrong or bad or needs to be hidden. Like Brene Brown says, like shame lives in the shadows. So if you can just like take a minute and like appreciate the food that you're eating, what's bad or wrong about that this thing that tastes really good and that feels good in your mouth and you swallow it and it makes your tummy feel like all full and nourished. Like that's not a bad thing. That's a beautiful thing that you've given your body energy to go do yoga, to go play with your kids, to go for a walk, to sit and do work. And I think just, the language that you use, if you say like, oh, I should eat a salad today because that's the healthy option, even just changing like, well, if I don't want to eat a salad, I don't have to eat a salad, but a salad sounds like it's going to have lots of colors. So it would have lots of vitamins and minerals. And I think my body would feel really happy after that because I'll have fed it all of these yummy nutrients. Or maybe you eat the salad and you sit there and you're like, I'm not full. My body doesn't feel good after that. It's the slow process of just getting to know what feels good. But yeah, that's such a great question. And I don't know if anyone else, has tips or tricks, on their own journey with dismantling shame surrounding food. If anyone else wants to share, that's kind of my personal journey and that's what I've learned in school. And what's frustrating is that it's a bit of a new movement, so this is kind of a radical like way of approaching nutrition that's kind of come about in recent years. So we're just starting to learn about it. It hasn't always been baked into like nutrition educator curriculum. So I'm really excited for it to be, part of this emerging field. But yeah, if anyone else has any tips, everyone's journey is different. So what works for me might not work for you, but obviously more perspectives are better.
Oh yeah, while we're still on nutrition, and I like that statement also about being aware of how we fall into that food trap. I had a young relative who came by and I had a great big orange and he said, "Can I have it?" And I said, "Sure, go right ahead. You can have it." So he peeled it and he came back in the room. He said, "I don't like the color." I said, "Well, it's a blood orange that did it." You know, so I think sometimes we have to be aware of what we say and how we say it and to whom we're saying it to. Because then all the other children who were over here, they just made faces and said, I'm never going to try that. I'm never going to try that. So we have to be aware of, how we communicate food, let alone what we like and what we don't like. So thank you for that information, about the deeper the color, the better the food, the more red to orange. I guess that would have been a real good one for him to eat. All right.
Yeah, that's such a good point about communicating about food and nutrition to children as well. I was out to dinner last night with my family and my little cousin. It was a hard-fought battle to get him to try the calamari. And he was like, Dad, so what is it? And he was like, oh, it's squid. Game over. He was like, what do you mean it's what? Like, just totally lost his mind. So totally agree that you need to be a little bit discerning when communicating those things to kids, like a blood orange, like, oh my gosh, there's blood in it. And it's no, there's not, but it's too late to walk it back at that point. They've already made up their mind. So yeah, just that goes back to the languaging, that we use, like, no, it's not, bad for you. It's good sometimes, it makes your body feel good sometimes. So yeah, thank you for that reminder about language and how important that is, especially when communicating to different populations, because saying the word blood orange to an adult might not have the same impact, or it might. So yeah, that's a great point.
I'm curious if Deb or Greg wanted to share anything also regarding shame and food, or other aspects of how shame shows up in caring for ourselves.
I have in my freezer back here a little pint of Haagen-Dazs ice cream, right? And it takes a whole lot of willpower to have 1 tablespoon and not eat the whole pint, right? Knowing that I am hypoglycemic, low blood sugar, that's the last thing that I need, right? And sugar is not our fan, not our friend. So I ration, I admit, full disclosure, every few days I'll tip in there and have it, and I act like it doesn't exist otherwise.
I think
I
an
do the
important
same thing.
distinction. Oh, sorry.
I was just saying, I do the same thing with my coconut ice cream, like coconut, because I do a lot of dairy-free stuff. But yeah.
I think the important thing that I think we create narratives around food that, like, Deb, if you were to not have that willpower one day and you ate the whole pint, that doesn't mean you're a bad person. That doesn't mean you did something wrong. That means that you really wanted that ice cream, and that's okay. Like, it's when we craft these narratives of like, oh my God, I messed up. Like, I'm so terrible at taking care of my body. I'm so like, I'm a bad person because I ate this ice cream. Like, we have these narratives around food that, like, I'm a good person if I eat salad, and I'm a bad person if I eat a whole tub of Haagen-Dazs. Like, or you're a really good person who just ate a whole tub of Haagen-Dazs, and bad people eat salads too. So, it's like, we need to watch those narratives. Because I saw, Atavia, you posted in the comments that you love pizza and it brings you joy, but shame seeps in sometimes, and you can mitigate it with exercise, but that's a balancing act, and it becomes stressful. Like, of course, because if we're propping up our sense of self-worth on what we eat, oh my gosh, eating isn't enjoyable at that point. It doesn't feel nourishing. It feels so stressful. It's like, if what I eat determines my worth as a person, like, where do you even start?
Yeah, I can share a bit about that too. And I'm a thinner body person who's been told all my life, you're so thin, you're so thin, you're so thin. Like, I'm the ideal. no pressure to live up to, like, to live up to that. And like, I have my own body shaming issues. And I know like when I gain weight, it's in my belly and my face. I'm like, I have a lot of belly shame. And I know like when it starts, you know, getting too big for my looks, I start to, you know, like shame myself. And I notice my own self-talk. And I think that's the piece you're pointing to, Michaeline, and like about the judgment and self-judgment about like the stories we tell ourselves. And also like it can be very motivated by your peer influence too. Like who's in your network, who else is telling you those things? And you know, do you have a supportive community of people that like, you know, don't really care, like, or aren't giving you those shaming messages too? I think the people you surround yourself, I know for me, like it's been a really positive thing. Or sometimes, you know, when other people would say things like that to me, I've started to confront them back and say, actually, you know, like, yes, I'm genetically predisposed, whatever, but like, I prefer you not to make comments about my body. You know, like really, it hasn't been until recently, until I've been kind of sharing those perspectives or talking back to other people and talking back to the voices in my head too, that, you know, those messages that get internalized.
Yeah, I'll just also throw out there as well, just when we're talking about all the self-talk and shame, one model of therapy, and there's many approaches you can even do yourself with this, would be that I find really useful when dealing with shame is internal family systems. So if you want to look that up, there's also self-therapy by, I'll put this in the chat in a moment. It's a book by a therapist named Jay Early. Of course, there's a point where it's useful to do this in conjunction with a therapist, but there are approaches in terms of just meeting the parts of yourself, right, that are carrying shame, or the parts of, you know, if we're sometimes talking about emotional eating and things of that nature, oftentimes that can be like a defense mechanism or a protective part of ourselves that is aiming to protect a more vulnerable kind of shame carrying part of ourselves in some way. So it can be kind of complex, but this, once you actually get the hang of this approach, it's a very compassionate way of meeting those aspects of ourselves that are feeling shame about whatever it is that we're doing with food.
Yeah,
Thank
we're all
you,
just trying to get
Melissa.
our needs met. That's all we're
Yeah.
ever trying to do.
Yeah.
That's all. Anything we all do is all day, every day. So much compassion for yourself and the food choices that you make. They have no impact on whether you're a good or a bad person. So I love that element of compassion that you brought in, Melissa. Like that's how you combat shame, is with compassion.
And that brings us back to yoga, like self-compassion, you know, working with the deeper aspects of yoga, I think are working with your mind, like working with your mind and working with your heart and purifying in yourself that negativity and the tension that you create internally, not externally. We could have a whole nother session on like a yoga body and like, right? Like what's a yoga body? Like all bodies are yoga bodies. Like we're all yoga bodies. We don't have to be this, you know, fit image of whatever, you know, a lot of the media shows of what it's supposed to be like. But there's a lot of shaming that goes on within the yoga community as well. So that could be a whole nother session.
So that's how we combat inflammation, is with compassion.
If we might just take just a moment to see if there's a final question, and then close in the next 5 minutes or so, if that's okay with people. Also, I'm just curious if whoever's the iPhone could just put in the chat your name if you don't want to tell us who's here. You can always direct message it to me or just unmute yourself. I'm just curious who the iPhone is. And if anyone has a final question before we close, you may ask.
One more. All right, Deb, was that what the doctor, the hospital gave you? Is that a breathing machine? I mean, is that a breathing pump or something?
It's an exerciser.
Okay, it's an exercise.
Yes,
Is that like the one that people have to breathe and push up the ball or something? And
yes, yes,
Barometer.
yes, there are different models, but yes, exactly, Sharon.
Okay, I think
Mhm.
I'd like to get one. I mean, just to know how well I'm breathing. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Can I make a comment? All right. I like this program today. This part of the symposium that we were invited to. And I really am going to remember a pose a day keeps the doctor away. Relax and breathe and eat well and enjoy life. And I thank you all very much.
Thank you, Sharon. I see one last question from Tavia about the breathing technique. So do they require nasal breathing on the exhale? Ideally, yes. The inhaling and exhaling, I'd have to think through all of the specific ones. But most of the ones that we did today, yes, would require inhale and exhale nasally. There's other techniques to sometimes let the breath out on an exhale, like a releaseful, like inhaling and then like just kind of letting a whole body sigh. But most of the ones we did today were nasal in and out. Thanks for asking.
And we will be sharing the slides with you in a follow-up email as well. So you'll have those as some reminders. And I guess the one other thing I might mention too, just with respect to sometimes we can get really hung up on I must breathe in and out of the nose, even if that is the most helpful thing. Obviously, if you're congested, there is a day that you're going to have to make some adaptations for yourself so that it's not a more stressful breathing experience, going back to a lot of what was mentioned today. So thank you so much to all of our presenters and for those of you who attended today. I'm gonna just real quick, I got kind of caught up in the moment, just share, I can get in here real quick, just our survey, although I'll send this in an email as well. Apologies, I'm having some issues getting back to my screen. So maybe what I will do, keep an eye out for an email and we'll go ahead and share the post wellness circle survey in an email, if that's okay. And then we'll also share information about classes with a link as well. Greg, was there anything else?
And when's the next wellness circle for folks to tune in, Melissa?
Yes, thank you. The next wellness circle, which will also be in the emails, just so you know, but will be September, September 19th at the same time. So we'll have a fall themed wellness circle. I believe it's going to focus on asana and nutrition according to Ayurveda for the fall season. I believe that's what we have on the schedule for September. But you'll get that in an email.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks.
Nice to meet you.
Likewise.
Enjoy the
Thank
rest
you,
of your
everybody.
day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.